You're listening to the Artistic Finance Podcast, Show 55. On today's show, I interview two people, set and garden designer Donyale Werle and lighting designer Beth Turomsha. We talk about their experiences buying homes in New York City in the early 2000s, what has happened since, and what they expect to do with their homes moving forward. We also discuss factors that affect home purchases, including climate change, quality of life, and inequity. If you're thinking about purchasing a home, listen to these artists who have lived and thrived through the experience. Without further ado, let's get to the show.
You're listening to Artistic Finance Podcast, where your host, Ethan Steimel, interviews successful artists, leaders, and investors to help educate and inspire artists to grow their wealth.
Welcome, everyone, and a special welcome to my patrons. As always, I'm your host, Ethan Steimel, and today I welcome set designer Donyale Werle and lighting designer Beth Turomsha. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
Thank you.
For people listening in the future, we are recording this on April 22nd, 2021. So we are amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. We're amidst a Black Lives Matter slow burn across the world and a Stop Asian Hate campaign in the U.S. Could you each give us an introduction to yourselves?
Sure. I'm Donyale Werle. I'm a set and garden designer and an advocate and activist in a couple different arenas with the Broadway Green Alliance and sustainability, and also with Design Action. And like you said, working for equity with BIPOC designers and BIPOC people around this country and the world.
And I'm Beth Turomsha. I'm formerly a theatrical lighting designer, and now I'm an architectural lighting designer and a mother.
And if you guys have listened to my podcast before, you might know that this next question is my favorite of all. And also, you don't have to answer any of this that you don't want to. But the question is, could you describe your demographics for us?
Sure. Okay. I go by she, they pronouns. I am white. I am 50. I have a master's. And I have a horticultural certificate, and I'm working on a second landscape design certificate.
I was laughing because I was young ladied yesterday on a conference call, and I had to shut that person down. And I will tell you what I told that contractor, and that is, I am middle-aged. I am not a young lady. And I am white. I live in New York. I've been in New York now for 25 years. Oh, I have an MFA. I have a BFA in lighting design, all theater-based. I have my LC accreditation, which is lighting certified, which is part of the architectural certification. And I'm also a member of the IES, Illuminating Engineering Society.
Your creative personalities. So Donyale, what is a live event that you like to experience as an audience member?
Live events. I think these days I like live outdoor events that have mass people. So it's like not a stage and not a particular performance. It's more groups of people getting together for a particular purpose. And that could involve social distancing. So it is definitely outdoor based. As a designer, landscape designer said, landscape design is the slowest of the performing arts.
That's great. My favorite live event, is some sort of experiential experience, which is a bit redundant. I would say that it's something unique and different and not commonplace, whatever that is.
That Van Gogh virtual experiment, is that too commonplace for you, or that's what you like?
No, I have tickets.
All right, now your financial personalities. Are you bad or good with money?
I would probably say I'm decent with money. I'm not wonderful, but I'm certainly not bad. I didn't grow up with a lot of money. My husband is really good with money. And so he, we've been together for 25 years. And so he has, by watching him, I've really realized, I've learned how to manage money much better. Definitely. But no, it was not natural.
All right, Beth, are you good or bad with money?
Generally speaking, I am good with money. / very good. It's ebbed and flowed through the course of my life. And I would say after graduate school, I got really bad with money. Coming out of graduate school with a lot of debt for a variety of reasons. And then I've definitely have been on the uptick since maybe about 5 years after graduate school.
All right, now to talk about real estate. And the reason we're talking about real estate is because in episode 1, so this is episode 55, Peter Kazarowski, the lighting designer, mentioned that he purchased a home and then sold it, and it was a great financial decision. And then I talked with painter Destiny Powell. She invests in real estate. And then even last week, we had David Jacques, who talked about his home in Long Beach, California. Real estate just comes up over and over again, playing into the financial picture of people's lives. So my question for both of you is, how did you guys get involved in real estate, and what has that journey looked like for you? And we'll start with Donyale.
My family is from the Midwest, and I come from like middle class, working class background. And so owning a home was really important. It was sort of the idea of like what the American dream was. And this is how you could sort of, save and move up a little bit. And so this kind of ethos was very, I would say, instilled in me at a really young age. I remember this as almost as early as like 5 or 6, like knowing the importance of like owning a home. Which seems odd as I say it now. But, and so in my 20s, I actually did make some money. I was a scenic artist, and was in the union, was in 816, local 816 in San Francisco when it was 816. And this was the .com boom in the 90s in San Francisco. And so there was a lot of work, tons of work. And I did end up saving money. I had my own business in San Francisco for 6 years as a scenic artist. And I had a small company, and we would do a lot of television and a lot of industrials. And anyway, so I saved a little bit of money. And then when I moved to New York, but I wasn't able to buy a place then, or didn't buy a place then, but moving to New York in 99 was when I first started to think about doing that. So we started looking in 99. Of course, that's when I was coming to grad school at NYU. In 1999 in New York, you could afford a place, right? It was very, compared to anything since then, it was really reasonable. Now, I didn't end up buying a place in 99, but did in 2000. And even though price jump from 99 to 2000 was a rather significant jump.
I think I should jump in because Donyale and I were looking at the exact same time, and we can relate it. I too came from a middle class family. Ironically, I grew up in Detroit, and my parents had bought their house for $17,000 in 1974, and they tried to sell it 10 years later. And I learned an opposite lesson of Donyale. They had put it on the market for $55,000 because it was Detroit during the 80s. They had a really hard time selling their home. And so they ended up selling their house for $5,000 more than what they bought it for. So for $22,000, 3 years after they put it on the market. So for me, real estate has never been a way to necessarily increase your financial well-being. My perception of it is it's a large debt that you're taking on, and you have to be able to sell your home. And it's not necessarily a given that you're going to be able to sell whatever piece of real estate you buy. I think there's a fallacy with the American dream that, you just buy a place and you upgrade and it's really easy to buy and sell. And because of my parents' experience, I have a very jaded perspective on that. When I moved to New York in 1996, I rented for a couple of years. And when I went back to graduate school, Donyale and I were in graduate school together. And we started to have the conversation about buying an apartment here in the city because it was so attainable. Before I went to graduate school, I had started looking, and you could buy a place in Long Island City for $70,000 for a studio. I mean, who couldn't come up with 20% of that? If you were parents, it was a lot easier. I mean, still as a working artist, it would be hard, certainly. 1999, I was able to find a place before Donyale, and I was able to purchase a place for a relatively low sum on the Upper East Side, no less, which made the commute to NYU pretty short and sweet, unlike my colleagues or fellow students who were traversing in from the boroughs.
The next thing would be, what was the process of buying that first place, and then what have you done since then?
So let's see, I ended up buying a place in 2000. And so what I did is I had assistance from my parents. They gave us, my husband and I, but it was before we were married. So this was 2000 and we were married in 2003. We were able to save up $10,000 from our jobs in San Francisco. And then my parents loaned us $20,000. And so we put a $30,000 down payment on a $160,000 apartment, $160,000 apartment in Park Slope. That was way over our budget, actually. Our budget was we started in 99 with a budget under 100. And then by the next year, things had jumped so much. And that time in the late 90s, the way, just did things as they go, ebb and flow. So it was 160,000, and that was August of 2000. We lived there for 15 years, and it was a 395 square foot apartment on the top floor in a Park Slope brownstone. It was a wonderful place to live, a co-op. I loved living there, but it was 395 square feet. So you can imagine, having, and it was sort of the busiest years of my career in theater. And it was very, it was just extremely tight. We had and I worked out of home. So a lot of assistants, associates working in the apartment. And so that's the way we live for, until 2015.
What happened there? Did you move, and how did that work out?
In 2014, we sort of realized this is too small. We're actually gotta find a place. So we moved into a rental, but it was, all of our stuff and everything. There's no way we could renovate. So we ended up getting a rental, ended up being for a year. It took us a year to renovate our little apartment to get it back in sort of working order to show to anybody. And during that year, we got a place a block away that had a yard. And it was the yard that all of a sudden was actually, we had actually tried to buy the apartment underneath us and do a spiral staircase between the two, but ran into extreme difficulties, both with the seller of that place and also getting loans. And it just became actually impossible for us to do. And we were, kind of licking our wounds in a way in this other rental apartment. And then we realized, why do we want to hold on to this neighborhood? That was sort of the issue. It was we didn't want to leave that building. We didn't want to leave that neighborhood. And once we got into the yard, we realized, you know what, that's sort of inconsequential. Let's just try something else. And so then it kind of launched into, which is actually a much longer story. So I want Beth to jump in here. I'll tell you about how we got the place I live in now.
Sure. So in 1999, I went back to graduate school, and my parents at that time, they had both of their children out of the home. They had some spare income, and because I was going back to graduate school and I was going to be going back to graduate school in New York, my parents approached me and they said, look, we'd like to buy an apartment for you. They were willing to put down the down payment. They had the cash for that. I did not. They were actually very generous. They paid for my housing and my maintenance while I was in graduate school. So I didn't have that overhead, but I paid for graduate school myself.
Can I just clarify that if you buy an apartment in New York City specifically, it's a little different than a single family home. It's usually a co-op or an organization. So you have to pay a maintenance fee of $500 a month or $1,000 a month or something like that. Was separate from the mortgage. They were paying your maintenance cost.
Correct. Excellent clarification. So my parents were able to come up with a $40,000 down payment. Or maybe it was only $30,000. I think it was 30 because my apartment cost $120,000. 500 square feet, Upper East Side, junior 1-bedroom. So what that means for everybody else who doesn't live in New York City is that it's a studio apartment. There is a little section that can be construed as a 1-bedroom, but it's not technically a formal 1-bedroom because there's no closet. And that's how bedrooms are defined in New York. Doesn't have a built-in closet. So I went to graduate school. My parents helped me out while I was in graduate school. After getting out of school, I took over my mortgage, my maintenance payments. I eventually got married, and I'm no longer married, so I'm going to refer to him as my ex-husband. My ex-husband and I bought my parents out of the apartment. So we had the place formally appraised. We took over the loan. We had our names on the loan. I gave my parents, I don't know, $150,000, $180,000. I don't know. It was some large chunk of money. And then I owned that apartment with my husband at the time. After a couple of years, my ex-husband was pressuring me to move, and he wanted a bigger place. So we bought the apartment that I'm in right now, which is a junior 2-bedroom in Hudson Heights. So it's a 1-bedroom with a small bedroom that does not have a built-in closet. Does that make sense? You're giving me this cloudy look.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I had a question, which is when you bought your parents out and you gave them $150,000, that $150,000 was the price of the apartment at the time?
No, that's a great question. So I think the apartment appraised for $240,000. So I gave them their down payment back, which I believe was $30,000. And then we took $240,000 and we divided it by half. And I gave my parents $120,000 or whatever on top of that. That's how I got to the $150,000 number.
Got it.
So my parents allowed me to keep half of the equity.
Got it. Okay. And then did you just take over paying the mortgage payment, or did you sort of like take out a mortgage payment to pay your parents? Or like what was your payment structure every month after you took that over?
Well, I had to get a mortgage like an adult. So I paid a mortgage every month from, I had a bank loan.
Okay. So it was just a brand new mortgage. You sort of closed out the first one and started paying your own. Got it.
I am not independently wealthy. There's no trust fund to pull from or anything like that.
All right. So that's where you are now. So should we then jump back to Donyale about how you got out of your apartment?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I had the same trajectory of Beth there. In 2010, we refinanced and bought the place from my parents. And so, and my husband, Paul, he put, now it's our name was on that mortgage. And so we paid them back as well. We weren't as generous as Beth. I think we gave them $50,000 and the appraisal. Well, they had given us 30, but we also, they received a lot in the tax break because they took the tax break of the 7 years or the 10 years, I guess. They were taking the tax break off of the apartment. So they saved a lot of money on their taxes. So all in all, it was a greater, I think they had gotten about, I don't know, 90,000 altogether, minus that original 20. So from 2010 to 2014, we owned it. And then in 2014, so we put our place on the market and sold it pretty quick for 400 and I think it was 35. So we did, it was a good investment from 160 to 435. Now we had taken out a second mortgage in 2010 for 170, I believe. So we had paid off a certain amount. And then of course, when we had gave 50,000 to my parents. So I'm not sure. I think we had made I think we walked away with around 200 and something, 230 maybe altogether. And we quite literally took that $230,000 when we sold our place and immediately put it into trying to buy this place that we have now, like quite immediately. So this place that we have now, so I started looking it took about almost a year, I would say, searching for this place because I started off doing what people do is just you kind of read all the blogs about housing and reading the Times and whatnot. And I realized during that year, that's kind of all BS. Like if you want to buy a home, you actually have to do so and within your price range because we didn't have, all we had really was that equity. We hadn't really, because I was a designer at that point, I didn't have any money, right? No money. And Paul, my husband, is a stagehand at BAM or was a stagehand at BAM. And so, a lot of our income was his. And so and if you read New York State real estate, they will tell you there's no way a middle-class person can afford real estate in New York. It's like, oh, it's impossible. And it's not impossible. And so during the course of that year, I really realized how to fight for a place, how to find a place, how to do it on your own, how not to believe when people tell you it's out of your reach. And to get to the point where when we got our place, I remember I was going through Street Easy constantly, like literally every single day for at least 2 to 3 hours a day, combing through Street Easy. I found this place. It went up on Friday, July 30th or so, July 29th, 2014. And I called them within 3 hours of it going up. And then it was, this is I live in Midwood, Brooklyn, South Brooklyn, a very religious neighborhood. The Shabbos is on Friday. So they ended up having showing on Friday, but a very short showing. And so we were the first people here, and we had seen so many places that were not going to work. And so it became super, like my husband within probably 10 minutes was like, we have to put an offer on this place. This was the day before we were going on a vacation camping for 2 weeks in Arizona or Utah. And so we were like, okay, we're going to figure this, how to do this. And, the next day was August 1st. Everybody in New York City goes away for August. It's a Saturday. We're trying to get a loan on a Saturday in August 1st. We went to every single bank in Brooklyn that was open to try to secure some kind of that really initial loan that just says I forget what it's called at this point, but they just, the pre-approved. Finally, after tracking around all day long, we finally get this loan. We got our application in at 5 p.m. on that Saturday, literally 24 hours after we saw the apartment. And then we hopped on a plane that night at 6 to go to Utah for 2 weeks. So, and then by Monday, they had accepted our offer. And so we spent the next 2 weeks trying to buy a home from basically my cell phone in an internet cafe in Moab, Utah, because we had no internet service at the campgrounds. And so all of our files, all of our, like every single piece of financial information that we had, which we never believed that we could afford it. It was on the market for 700 and something, 738 maybe. And it was above our asking. So anyway, that's where I'll stop with that.
You mentioned that you were going online, you were reading the Times, looking for things, and that you couldn't afford it. But that's all BS. Like if I were to buy a place in New York City, this is how I imagine it would go, is I would go online, look at the listings until I found a place that was in my price range, and then try to make that happen. Am I looking at places that are too out of my price range and sort of like ignoring them, and maybe I should take a second look at them? Or what do you mean by it's all BS? Like, what did you do differently?
Okay, so what I think generally what we do is we actually all narrow our parameters too quickly. And so we believe things that people tell us, and especially if it's written down, we believe it. And so what we started doing actually is in Street Easy, instead of saying I want a 2-bedroom apartment, we said we wanted a 4-bedroom, or like the most, like we changed the parameters quite a bit. And so what it did is it actually opened up your opportunities really wide. So I think what originally a lot of folks tend to do, they tend to like, oh, I can't do this because it's too far, or I can't live there because I don't like that neighborhood, or the ideas of home ownership seem a lot of times unattainable because we, in fact, put our own boundaries upon ourselves about what is attainable. And I think there's this, particularly with artists, there's this narrative of, I can't afford home ownership. I am either a suffering artist, or there's a bit of martyrship in not having. And what I say is I live in a neighborhood in Midwood, which is, we are not a wealthy neighborhood. This is, I would say, this is an immigrant community. There are, this is not I'm telling you, this is not, people here don't have money. Almost every single person on my block is a homeowner, except for the apartment buildings that are rentals. So that it's changing your ethos and your mindset about what home ownership actually means.
Beth, since we've talked about Donyale so much, do you have anything to add? You're currently in a place, and I assume you're happily in that place, and you're not looking to go anywhere anytime soon.
That is incorrect.
This is the first time I've ever been wrong on the podcast. So, I've never been wrong before. Okay, so what are you doing?
Yeah, so I have a bright child, and I can say that because he's in this program that's part of the New York public system, school system. And he's in the accelerated program. And if you read any of the articles in the New York Times or the Post and you follow education, you know that and I hate this term, the talented and gifted program is under fire right now. And the city and the school system is struggling to resolve systemic racism within the education system, which I'm totally in favor of. However, because my son is in this what I prefer to call an accelerated program, Mayor de Blasio has been trying to dismantle this program for the last 3 or 4 years now. We have a new chancellor who also wants to bring equity to the education system, which again, I am in favor of. Depending on what happens with this accelerated program may mean I may stay in my apartment for the next 10 years, or I may move out of my apartment to a nearby community that has an excellent school system, that has an accelerated program, or just get more space. Or I may buy a country home because my child is slowly but surely getting bigger with each passing year, and boys get big and they need room. Particularly over the last year, I've been in a state of flux looking at nearby communities. What is the commute like? How much can I get for my money? Do I really want a home? Deal with all the maintenance horror stories that I hear from Donyale? Do I want a townhome where I don't have to deal with fixing the roof or dealing with the gutters or shoveling snow? And what is the best end result for my son? So right now, I feel like I'm in a state of flux, and I can't make any big life decisions, I feel, because I'm at the mercy of the mayor's race and getting somebody in the mayor's office who's actually going to do something. Our mayor has just stopped doing his job. It's hard. I'm a big planner and I like to anticipate. Things are so chaotic with the accelerated program, it's hard to anticipate which way it's going to go, which way the leaves are going to blow. I can't figure out if I need to sell my apartment and go move to Tenafly or Creek Hill or Hastings on Hudson. I just don't have enough information at the moment.
So your parents bought a place in Detroit. It did not appreciate greatly. The place you got on the Upper East Side did appreciate and helped you get this current place. But you moving out of this current place, you're not looking to turn a profit to capitalize on the appreciation. Your decision for moving is more just everything else, but not really. Money plays a part, of course, but that's not your motivating factor now.
Well, that's a great question because I haven't brought up my whole other thought process behind it. If we do stay, I work in architecture. I read a lot of articles about climate change and what's happening with the world and our cities and blah, blah, blah. And what is New York going to really look like 10, 20, 30 years from now? I don't think we know that. And I think the days of people living in their apartment for 30 years and then selling it and making $2 million and that's their nest egg for retirement, I think those days are in the process of leaving us. If I don't move due to educational reasons, I do see myself, quote unquote, cashing out within the next 10 years. And my preference is actually to rent. I'm not quite sure what the real estate market is going to be like in 15 and 20 years. And I don't know how hard it's going to be to sell an apartment. People in New York operate under the assumption that they'll always be able to sell. They'll always make money. They're never going to take a loss in their apartment. And I think due to climate change, we're going to start to see the scale tip. I look at my apartment and I think, okay, so how much longer can I actually make a profit from this? I'm intending to make somewhere between, I hope to make about $400,000 when I do sell my apartment minimum. I feel like it's a bet I'm hedging. It's like playing the stock market, really, if you take into account real life events. And I think a lot of people are burying their head in the sand. That makes sense. Is it depressing? Have I just ruined your podcast?
No, I don't. I actually don't think that's depressing at all, because you're just describing life in the situation. Because another way to say people are burying their head in the sands is also another way to say there's a lot of things we can't control. The climate change situation, I think the focus so often is about, oh, New York's going to build a Watergate, or these are the steps that we're going to take to make sure New York stays New York. And it's not about sort of a more reality, maybe, that we don't know. There's a lot of unknowns, and we actually do know a lot, and all signs are sort of pointing to that's not going to work.
But also from a real estate perspective, I'm really hesitant to own anything after, say, 10 to 15 years from now, because I don't think we know what life is really going to be like. And I feel really bad that I've brought a child into the world. And, it all, it's all interconnected. I mean, we want to think of real estate as being something separate, but it's not. I just don't know what New York is going to look like for him or anywhere.
Donyale, I'm curious about the place you're in now. Are you planning to stay there, or is your motivation when you move, is it going to be based on financials, or is it going to be more about your quality of life, et cetera?
I kind of agree with Beth in a lot of ways in that, and I don't know. I mean, I here we are a year into this pandemic with still no work, really. And it was not in theater, at least. Both my husband and I are in school for horticulture and landscape. And so our goal is to pivot and work. We have a small firm together. And so that we have the freedom to move anywhere else, like we could work in other cities. And so that's, to kind of, the goal is sort of a longer term goal is to shift out of the entertainment business and into something that is more sustainable in multiple places in the country. So I do think the pandemic has changed New York in pretty big ways. I mean, if y'all go downtown or midtown, I mean, it is a very different place. Now, there is one thing I wanted to say about our transaction. So this is pivoting subject matter wise, if you don't mind if I talk about it, because it was a really crazy thing in the way we bought our house. This place, we found it on Street Easy. We did not have a broker, right? And so we did have a really good lawyer, but we didn't have a broker. And so the process wasn't easy. It was great, but it wasn't easy. And this is the key to why we got it so I wouldn't say cheap, but we got it so reasonably priced. So this is a 4-bedroom house in Midwood, Brooklyn. It's a townhouse, and we have a yard and a garage. When we got it, and the real estate agents were less than savory, I would say. So the buyers ended up really liking us and wanting to sell us the house, except we couldn't get a loan. The bank would not give us a loan in 2014. And some of this had to do, even though we had a loan for a really long time, but we could not get a loan. And part of the reason was we live in Midwood. The train is right outside, the above ground train. So it's it's the Q train, and we're at the Avenue J stop. And so it's the train station is we're facing it. So there's this little area like 15 feet or 20 feet behind our backyard. And then there's the elevated platform for the train. So the bank said that we were so close to the train that it was not a valuable property, that it was actually, they were asking too much for the property. The second reason why we couldn't get the loan is the house hadn't been renovated. So this is a house that was built in 1915. It's all original. It's original tin ceilings, original glass, like everything in the house is original, with the exception of the kitchen was renovated in 1972 and the bathroom was renovated in 1958. So I'm saying like renovated only to like we don't even have kitchen cabinets, we don't, like, it was renovated in 58 to like give us proper plumbing, for the 20th century. So that for the bank, that was not considered valued. Whereas if you went to North Brooklyn, those type unrenovated apartments are considered to be like the most valuable apartments. But because of this location and being so close to the train, it was not valued. And so we wrote a 4 or 5 page letter to the bank saying how much we valued the place and why we thought it was actually the value that it was not overpriced. It was actually the price that we wanted. So, talking about the architecture of the house, talking about how important it was for us to be close to the train because of our travel, because of our work, because I was always traveling late at night to Times Square. So fast forward a little bit, we couldn't get the loan. They wouldn't offer it to us. And so my lawyer, who's wonderful, Bob Dubno, he said, do you think you can get a lower price on that house? And I was like, I think maybe we can. And so we went directly to the seller and we said, listen, we can't get the loan. Would you be willing to take a lower offer? And they were like, yeah, okay. And so we came up with something that was $75,000 less. I think it was $670,000. And they accepted it. Yeah. And the owners, the sellers accepted it, but the real estate agent did not. So what they did is they took this real estate agent, had our money in escrow, which was, I believe, $75,000, which was the down payment. Right around 75,000. They put the house back on the market. And I happened to find, we had this feeling, just because there was a lot of things, I'll tell you his little story. But so I went on Craigslist and I found this house back on the market. So they were trying to show it again while it was in escrow. I called my lawyer immediately, sent him, screenshots of the listing, and we called right away the seller, and we're like, okay, this is off the table. We're not gonna, we're rescinding our offer because you put this house back on the market. There are so many things that can go wrong. So if you don't have the time to really, especially if you want to get these deals, you got to put in so much time to sort of watch it all out. Totally worth it though. I mean, and we ended up getting it, right? We got it for the lower price. The whole process took 6 months because we couldn't get this loan. So if you don't have a real strong stomach to handle New York State real estate, particularly in for lower price real estate, it's not probably good to do.
So I had a very different experience when I bought this apartment. Donyale, you're going to die. It was like the easiest thing you could ever experience. My ex-husband and I, we came up to this neighborhood. We looked at 4 apartments, and this was the last apartment. And we were like, yeah, okay, well, this is how much we'll offer you. And the broker told us what number to put in, which was $465, because the seller had accepted that number and the previous buyer fell through. We bought it for $465, no problem. It appraised for $495. We automatically made $35,000 when we bought the apartment. It appraised for $30,000 more. Co-op sales, they take a long time here in New York. So it took 4 months, but it was just smooth as silk. No problems.
Well, those are both wonderful stories. Polar opposites. What has been the most positive experience from this real estate game that you've played over the years?
The positive thing is that we have a house that we love, and in our life, we love our house so much. It's so much a part of who we are. We, we entertain quite a bit, it was cook and parties, and it's our family. Right. There's so many people come here and stay with us. And I would say it's the quality of life is so much better making these choices. And I wouldn't change it even if we make or lose money. To me, hopefully we'll make it. If we lose it, that's the way it goes. But I would say I don't think we're going to lose it. It has appreciated since we got it. And I would say quality of life is really more important. And I don't care about how long any commute is. I don't care, of all the things, in that maybe I cared at some point in my life, what neighborhood I live in. I don't care about any of that anymore at all.
I have a slightly different take. I love having an apartment. I love owning a piece of property. I think what's most important for people outside of New York to understand is that when you live in a co-op, you're a real community and people take care of things. Whereas in rental buildings, people might not necessarily recycle correctly, or they might not throw their trash out, which is a huge thing, particularly during the summer months, because you'll have cockroaches and mice running everywhere. And that's the last thing anybody wants in their apartment and their building. But what I love about owning my place is as a designer, I get to express who I am and I can impose that on the walls without having to deal with a landlord saying, no, that color paint's too dark, or no, you can't put wallpaper up. What I also love about owning a place is that there's a sense of community. I have neighbors on both sides of me that I can depend on. I have neighbors up and down my building. I live in a 80 unit building and I know half the building. And so on any given day, I am saying hello to a half dozen people. We have spring and fall parties, and the whole neighborhood or the whole building will get together and we'll do a pop-up style thing and we'll just congregate. During the pandemic, every month at least, we would do one socially distanced cocktail evening, out in our courtyard. And people in my neighborhood, it's small enough where I can walk down the street and I can say hello to a half dozen people. I might not always know their name, but I see them on the same train every day. And we know them. My son has a neighborhood and a group of people he's known since birth. And I think that's really important. There's only one person who cuts his hair. It's just really having that tight-knit community, I think, is so important, especially when you're coming from a home where a parent has decided to leave and cause all kinds of emotional and psychological upheaval. It's great to have some I'm hugging myself. Nobody can see that. It's just great to have some sort of support network there for him.
You guys have both purchased real estate, and it seems that financially it has benefited you. Do you think that other designers or other artists, should everybody try to get some property?
Why wouldn't they?
I think I'll speak from the eye here. I think that if you are a theater artist, I don't feel it's a particularly sustainable career. I think, and I do see as younger folks really, diversifying their income sources and diversifying their platforms of design. I think if you narrowly, same way with narrowly focusing your ideas of like what your life could be or your house could be or your neighborhood could be, narrowly defining your income source, I think it will be problematic. And I think as you age, you setting up things. I mean, the reason why we're okay now is because we made smart choices in our 20s, actually, in 30s. And so if we hadn't made those sort of like more, I would say, maybe boring choices, or, we were very conservative with our choice, financially with our choices. And I think that's why we're able to have more freedom now. And I think as you get older, particularly as a person in their 50s now, looking like, what does it look like for my 60s? You certainly can't rely on theater. Like, it will not pay, it will not give you the kind of retirement that you need.
Well, I would quibble with that. I too was married to a stagehand, and I know what a local one stagehand makes. And I would say if you're a stagehand, you can retire on a pension. You do make a lot of money. The designers, unless they have a hit show, they're the ones who are struggling.
I'm specifically talking about theater designers. What real estate has been an ability to actually survive. Of course, if you spend more than what you can afford, then it's not going to help you. But if you save money and you actually get money, you get a place that is something that you can, maybe it's more than what you wanted to spend, but I had an associate, my associate Craig Napoliello, he bought his apartment in, I'm forgetting the neighborhood, but it's not Yonkers, but it's close, it's up north. He bought his apartment in maybe 5 years ago or 6 years ago for 170, maybe 165.
Yonkers
it's not all the way in Yonkers. It's still,
maybe it's Riverdale, 5 years ago, that might've been possible. The trick is not about, should theater artists invest in real estate? I think it's how do theater artists make enough money to afford real estate? Real estate has gotten so obscenely expensive here. I consider my neighborhood to be one of the last affordable neighborhoods in Manhattan. When I sat on the board, my co-op board, I would look at people's application packets and, they're a senior VP at blah, 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 or they're a principal of blah, blah, blah. And, these are highly successful people who have managed to come up with these sizable deposits, these down payments that are needed. Unless a theater artist makes the decision to live in the Bronx, which is fine. There are plenty of beautiful areas of the Bronx. I've looked at moving there myself. Or Yonkers or something like that. There aren't a lot of places where you can kind of scrape up $30,000 and have enough money to put as a down payment in New York. It's just, unless you're independently wealthy, you're shut out of the game.
I don't know, though. And that's what I was trying to say at the beginning. Like, I actually think there are some places it just takes a lot of work.
I know. And I'm like quibbling with that again.
I think you're both right. The answer is always, you can figure it out. If you're working, 6 days a week, 16 hours a day in the theater, you don't have time to figure it out. But like Donyale says, is like, they went after that apartment through ups and downs and kept at it. If you really want it, like if you prioritize it that much, where there's a will, there's a way. But that way, it's going to have a lot of hurdles. It's going to take a lot.
I want to add to that. I had to stop working for a period of time to focus on this. So, and I teach too. I teach at Brooklyn College. I wasn't teaching at the time though, but you have to, it's making decisions. If you're spending all your time in the theater, you're not going to be able to have other things and do other things. So the diversifying your career, I think, is key. I think the idea of there's one way and I'm going to be a theater artist for my entire life. I feel like what you're doing is you're shutting yourself off to so many opportunities that might be right in front of your face.
I totally agree.
Doing this podcast, the more designers I talk to, every time I talk to a designer, I come away with, I got to stop designing, or I have to design less. And anytime I talk to anybody else doing anything else, I'm like, I got to do something else. but I haven't pivoted yet. Like, I still say, I'm a lighting designer, but hey, I haven't designed since December. So it's been 4 months. So am I really a lighting designer? Come on, Ethan, get your shit together.
I think what you said, Ethan, is really good though, because here's what I think gets into the psychology of this is you're asking yourself, am I still a lighting designer? Because you haven't designed a show. Yes. And I say, I'm going to be a set designer until the day I die, even though I might be designing landscapes. You're always a lighting designer. It doesn't matter how much you pivot into other things. You're a lighting designer that's doing a podcast. Beth is a theatrical lighting designer that's doing architectural lighting. It's the idea of identifying ourselves as one thing is the problem. We are putting we're putting our own boundaries upon ourselves. And if we have to open ourselves in the theater, open ourselves to doing a bevy of things. We're always still who we are. I think we've been on this sort of competitive, this ladder climbing, systematic, it's sort of systematic racial hierarchy structure that is not serving any of us very well. Kind of getting rid of these titles, what we do, how we identify, is going to help us sort of free us to imagine another life.
That's really interesting, because then I think it starts to delve into American culture and how does American culture contribute to this, right? If you go to Europe, people don't automatically, when they meet somebody, start identifying themselves by their profession. They talk on an intimate, personal level. We lack the capacity to do that.
I would say, that white people have...
White people?
Yeah. It's a very different, living in a non-white community, the way the community functions, the way families function is very, very different. The way religion functions in the society is really different from how I see white theater. So I think we have a lot to learn. Honestly, I think we have a lot to learn. I mean, there's 3 white people having this conversation.
I joke that the demographic question is my favorite question. Like, I'm uncomfortable asking that question, but I also think it's important that we have context, that all these answers and all these discussions are coming from our perspective, and that's going to vary wildly.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if I was a different color, would my parents have been able to help me in the very beginning? No. I think we all know the answer to that question. Probably not. I'm curious, Ethan, is it your premise or is it your belief structure that you think probably the most secure way to building financial health as an artist?
No.
No. Okay.
For me, it's just I've had all these conversations and real estate comes up. The real estate conversation we've had today is you both purchased homes. There's a huge difference on purchasing real estate for quality of life versus, I'm going to be an artist and I'm going to buy a rental property out in the Midwest somewhere that it's a lower price, I can afford it, and it's going to give me a little bit of money and I'm going to build some equity. And it's solely going to be an investment.
Sure.
There's so many aspects to real estate, and this is just one.
Got it.
Real estate has given us money and then the money has given us a safety net to do the things that we don't necessarily do for money, right? So it does allow me to do activism work because I have a home that I don't have to worry about losing this home. I don't have to worry about, there's a lot of things that it's allowed. So, but it's so interesting because I think we're both talking about life quality, life, or even not even quality, but the idea, like almost like philosophy of life, philosophy through real estate. I mean, I think real estate to me is so much about race. It talks about inequities. It talks about securities. It talks about people's identity. There's so many things, their religion, there's so many things that real estate is a connective tissue with so many things in our lives. So it's like to talk about real estate, it's an ongoing conversation that's really complicated and complex. And Beth talked about education, it's like in the way people make choices based on where they live in school districts. So it's a really deep and long conversation. And I think only a small fraction of it is about money.
Just a couple more financial questions just to wrap us up, which is, what is some financial advice that you would give to yourself back when you started your career? Invest
immediately. Invest as soon as you get out of college, start investing and invest every single week and make smart choices about every dollar that's coming in, invest a certain portion of it.
I would agree with that sentiment. I think I would also say, really look at your overhead. Be mindful of it, and don't pay attention to what others are necessarily buying or wearing, because it's going to hold you back from making smart financial decisions. And I think particularly here in New York, it's so commonplace to walk down the street and you can have a very wealthy person wearing the latest and carrying the most expensive Hermes bag, walking next to somebody who has nothing. You always see this disparity. I think it's very easy to get caught up in having stuff. Put that all in a corner in a box somewhere and just focus, try to develop goals and focus on them.
I love both of those answers. What Donyale said, which is every week, invest every week, like not every month, not every quarter. Don't think about it every so often. Every single week, invest. And I think that frequency is a really important point. And then, Beth, you had a really good point, and I forgot what it was. What did you say?
Oh, overhead. I learned that from Donyale.
No, but that's really important. Keep your overhead low, because John Lee Beatty, he said that too. He said, I accidentally kept my overhead really low, and ta-da, my income grew, but my overhead didn't. Other people left the industry and left the city, and I survived. So, but I just want to add on to that, which is, yes, keep your overhead low, but I know lots of artists at the lower end of the income spectrum whose overhead is very low. I want to push on your point, which is once your overhead is as low as it can be, you then have to make more money. You have to make more money. The overhead can only go so low. I'm talking to myself, really, Ethan. You have to make more money.
You're totally right. And the other really important thing is, yes, it's important to keep low overhead, but also have health insurance. Don't skip on that. And I think artists so often, they make that choice and they choose to skimp on health insurance. I'm somebody who got very lucky. I had a major health crisis in my mid-20s when you're supposed to be super healthy. Thank God I had medical insurance.
All right. So final question, where can people find out more about you?
I have an Instagram account. I don't really post to it that much. I have a website. I disabled it actually because I was too cheap, because I wanted to keep my overhead low. Well, I write a really short bio too on my company's website. So I don't know. I guess you have to meet me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the great thing about social media is Instagram. We're all sort of out there in some ways, and maybe not as great. I mean, I love Instagram. I love the democracy of Instagram, because I think younger designers can reach us. It's just I mean, I'm in constant contact with designers all the time. So you email me, you find me basically, and you can find my email is my name plus Gmail. So, and Instagram, you can generally find us in that way. I would say, yeah, the idea of websites is a little bit dated, but I know folks still look at websites for sure.
I'm accessible, and if somebody wants to pick up the phone and call me, they can always call me, and I'll spend an hour, no problem, talking to somebody.
Thank you both for having this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That was our episode with Donyale Werle and Beth Turomsha. My takeaways were: quality of life and non-financial factors play into purchasing a home. Appreciation does happen, but it isn't guaranteed. And diversify. Just as owning real estate can diversify your financial portfolio, make sure your income sources are also diverse. Sometimes to be a better artist, you need to have income that is separate or adjacent to your art. In our patron-only episode, we discuss more about inequity, climate change, pivoting, and a wild story about the broker that sold Donyale her most recent home. Access those outtakes at patreon.com/artisticfinance. Patrons at all levels get early access to the episodes, the extended interviews, and a private podcast feed. And remember, as always, if you're not ready to become a patron but you want to listen to the outtakes, email me directly at artisticfinancepodcast@gmail.com, and I will share the audio with you directly. None of us today are giving advice as to whether purchasing real estate is right for you. I've compiled a list of pros and cons to consider if you're thinking about purchasing property. Pros: appreciation. Historically, houses are worth more as time goes on because currency devalues with inflation. Deductions. You can deduct the interest payments off of your taxes, whether or not you itemize. A real asset. Stocks and bonds are imaginary, nor can they act as a home. Equity. You build equity as you pay off your loan. Or you can build equity by making improvements to the property. Diversification. It diversifies your financial health because if the stock market crashes or your pension fund goes bankrupt, you at least have a place to live. What are the drawbacks of real estate investing? The cons. Depreciation. Appreciation works in reverse, and a property can lose value over time. Taxes and maintenance. Property taxes and maintenance costs will be with you as long as you own the property. Liquidity. Property is an illiquid asset. You can't quickly sell a home for market value. You might need to move first before being able to sell. And like Donyale said, in a city like New York, it can easily take 6 months or longer for a real estate transaction to go through. Equity loss. If a hurricane comes and knocks the roof off or a pipe bursts, your property may be worth less than when you purchased it. My final thought is that our discussion today was about quality of life, home, and community. Yes, finance was involved in purchasing the properties, but these were not intentionally or solely investment decisions. Investing in a rental property or in a REIT or a real estate company is a separate conversation. Check out our episode 42 with Matt Piceni for a perspective of a real estate investor whose intent is to make money. That's it for today. Until next time, break a leg.
Thank you for listening to Artistic Finance. Make sure to subscribe. To access our show notes, transcripts, or resources, go to artisticfinance.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any decision, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Artistic Finance. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.